I'm going to talk about some things that really, I think, are critical to the students in the audience, but also to the older members of our community. And what I'm really trying to do is look at the future. And one of the things that I want to stress is something that Professor Wong taught me when he was a Fulbright professor at Yale. He worked hard trying to educate the Yale students and the faculty, a difficult and impossible job, but he worked away at it. And I said, well, this isn't the real America. I'm going to take you to the real America, which is way up in northern Maine. If you look at a map, there's a little part of the United States that sticks up and is surrounded by Canada. Well, this is way up there, as far as you get away from the United States and still be in it. And I have a little cabin up there, and he and his family came up to visit and see the real America. And I said, well, you can't really experience it unless you canoe. You have to go in an Indian-style canoe and get into the nature in that way. To my knowledge, he'd never been in a canoe before, nor had his children. So my philosophy of education is you take the student and you dump them into something, let them thrash around, and pretty soon they learn how to do things. And then I say, here's what you learned. So that's my job, is to remind them of what they learned. So here are Professor Wong's two young children. We drive up to the put-in place of the canoe, and we put the canoe in the water, and they get in it, they have their life preservers on, and the canoe is going back and forth and so on. And they get in the canoe, and I say, well, go up the river, you'll have a wonderful time. That's it. That's the instructions. But don't stand up in a canoe because it's liable to tip over. And you fall in the river and you go over the waterfalls, and that's not a really good thing to do. So I put them, saw they got up the river and left. And the thing that really most impressed me is there was a sense about our species, and Professor Wong in general, is that we know how complex the world is, and how complex the things we try to deal with are. Many times we try to run away from it. We try to say, well, that's not for me. I don't want to try that. And Dr. Wong, here is crazy American, puts him in a canoe and sends him up the river with the two most precious things in his life. And they had a wonderful time. And I think whenever we approach nature, it is with that sense of risk and that sense of awareness of humility. That is, we do not know all there is to know about an ecosystem. We do not know all there is to know about what we're trying to do in this world. So part of my agenda here is to communicate to you as a professor, as a teacher of graduate students in forestry and environmental studies, and how I try to break out of the classroom and say, how do we build a better career for you and a better, different, more adaptable profession to the 21st century. Coming over here on the airplane, there was this newspaper article called The Age of Flower Towers. And we have a bunch of architects building 20-story buildings and planting trees all the way up and down this building in Amsterdam. And what really struck me is it says these towers are a new collaboration between architects, engineers, and botanists. Where's the foresters? Where's the cooperation with a forester? A forester would say, that's a stupid tree to plant there. That's a stupid thing to do. And here's why. Here's how you might get the kind of greening you would think about. And I would say in these days, forestry is in a something retreat position in most parts of the world. Limited number of students or less. Many places forestry schools have been exterminated. A whole lot of things. And I suggest it's partly because we haven't kept up with the demographic realities. Humanity's dominant habitat is cities. Now, if beavers started building habitats at the top of trees, there'd be big headlines, and scientists would be running out getting big grants to say, oh my God, this is a huge change. People move from the kind of habitat they've had for thousands of years, and nobody says anything. Pretty soon, 7 billion or more people, well over half, will be living in cities. Where are the foresters? Where are the naturists? Where are we if we're not part of that demographic trend? And that's sort of what I'm going to try to stress, and why I'm going to stress why students here are my hope. I'm a grandfather, and I'm a great-grandfather, and I have hope in them, but those few people aren't enough. So I have to have hope in you, too. So let me say what I think are the 4 greatest modern changes and successes of forestry. The first was the reforestation of Japan after the Second World War. Amazing. You look at the country before they started the reforestation. Devastation. No trees. 20 years later, we have a huge forest stretching from end to end of Japan. The second big major forest change is the transformation of application in forestry in Taiwan. To my knowledge, this is the only developed country where, in a sense, we decided there's more to a forest than trees, and that it has tremendous economic, social, cultural, and other benefits, and that we need to find ways to capture it. Some of the speeches today have given us some of that. The third is the growth and expansion of community social forestry programs, particularly in countries like Nepal, Himalayan countries. We have gone in Nepal from when I first started in '89, a program there where scattered villages trying to grow their own trees. And the forestry department said, no, you don't know how to do it. We know how to do it. We're foresters. But how come? The villagers have been growing trees a lot longer than they were foresters. So maybe they know something that we don't know. And today, there are over 13,000 community forestry groups in Nepal, from 0 to 13,000. They have their own organization. A few years ago, when there was virtually no government in Nepal, the joke was the king of Kathmandu. Nowhere else did the king have any authority. Who ran the country? The village forestry, the social forestry groups. They provided education, provided all the basic kinds of social programs. So we, in a sense, had that major change. And the fourth is 2 years ago, the United States Forest Service established field stations, U.S. Forest Service field stations in New York City and another one in Baltimore, and others are planned. That is, the Forest Service has moved from the rural countryside into the inner city. And here we are getting ready to prepare forestry. I also did want to say I'm very pleased to be here at the 100th birthday of Taiwan and the centenary of the Alichan forestry program. When you're at my stage in life, it's always nice to be in places where you're not the oldest person or thing around. And so I'm very pleased for that opportunity. And I'm very pleased to have been here for such a great event. But primarily, I would say President Ma is correct when he calls on China to emulate Taiwan. And I'll say that because China has no forestry program of the depth and sensitivity that you have in Taiwan. What I'm going to try to suggest is that we now have to think how to convert the reality, the progressive spirit that Taiwan has into trained professionals that can implement those things. Because one of the big things in Nepal was we created professionals who could actually work in villages, with villagers, with mutual respect most of the time. So I'm going to try to stress that. I've given a variety of items to Professor Wong. I'm going to show you 2 students who were part of our Urban Resource Initiative. Both of these students came wanting to work overseas as Peace Corps or other kinds of operatives. And yet they ended up in working in urban areas. I saw some of the things you had, environmental education. We've been working with kids now for over 25 years in the inner city, giving them their nature back. Saying, this is your country, this is your land, these are your resources and your responsibilities, and isn't it wonderful to have it? So I've got some of those. Some of the other green skills we've tried to do. I have a booklet that we did a couple years ago on other voices, other ways, bridging local and professional and environmental knowledge. How do we bring professionals and local knowledge together in some comprehensive way so mutually the stewardship job is done. I have some brochures on our Urban Resources Initiative, started in America's oldest forestry school, well over 100 years. And then a few of these maps. It's called the New Haven Green Map. We've started one in Baltimore too. And what this is largely the work of students working in neighborhoods, working with public officials to create a map for the ordinary citizen about all the various environmental things, from air pollution to pollution sources, to parks, forests, trees, and so on. So basically, there's some items you'll have that he can share with you however he does that. But I think you'll find that in the materials that are in the booklet, I have a set of items in Chinese, which are basically how to do it, how to work at the local community level. The other item that's in the publication is about when you go to work in a developing region, whether in your own country or elsewhere, here's some things you ought to think about. And one of the things that we most often forget as intellectuals, as scientists and researchers, is our rational approach to the world is a minority. Most people don't think the way we think. Most people turn to their particular God, or their particular body of faith, or their particular explanation of the unexplainable. We think there's got to be a rational cause-effect. There's got to be some reason why things are that way. The mass of people have that answer already. If you look at the crazy politics in the United States today, you see the emergence of that populace who think faith is the primary way to understand the world. So we have to not only respect that many people's answers come from faith, from religion or other kind of things, and that those are important demonstrators of the value of nature. So our job is how to understand how to work with those beliefs, how to help that faith, that strong belief, to become something. Sort of the belief Professor Wong had in me that I wouldn't really do something totally stupid, even though I probably did. But that this person, this crazy American, isn't going to send us into a great abyss. But we have to have faith in many ways. So those are two kind of articles you have. So I'm going to begin with two, and you'll have several of these these discs, 2 different types. And there's going to be a brief introduction to the URI program. And then 2 of the students, one who worked with recidivist prisoners at Rikers Island in New York City, a huge prison complex. And the other one is who was both of these were interns in Baltimore, and one who used the 9/11 crisis and studied the emergence of people's search for answers to the unanswered. And they turned to trees. And Erica was very extensive at working with people throughout the United States who felt if they could plant a tree, some way to put that seedling in the ground that would renew itself and would somehow overcome the awful tragedy of that 9/11. I suspect that those may be areas that will occur in Japan, where that great crisis, where people will seek ways, and very often will be a tree-shaped desire. That was here in the United States, there were gardens, all kinds of places where people created memorials to the people who died in the 9/11 crisis. And as you go around the world, you start to see that is a fairly common human reaction wherever we are. Some way to capture our mourning and our concern in something that brings life from that. So she's pretty interesting, and she now works for the U.S. Forest Service on those kinds of programs. So.
None of this was happening, in your life. It really had an impact on my professional life. Not just an impact, but really gave me. It never gave me my professional life.
The director of the Tropical Resources Institute, and there was an African-American, Dr. Ralph Jones, who was just been appointed head of Rec and Parks Department in Baltimore. And I told him I was doing Nepal. And he said, well, why aren't you doing that here in the city? That sounds just like what we need. And then we arranged to bring Dr. Jones up here and talk to students, and there was enthusiasm both ways that this was a real necessary thing like I didn't have before. And then Dr. Jones had a heart attack, a young fellow too, and so I felt even more strongly that we needed to do something. And so in '89, Morgan Grove was a student here, and I said I had a deal we can't refuse. How'd you like to be our first intern?
Burch said that he wanted me to go to Baltimore to do it. And I said, well, I already have a summer job. And Burch said, well, quit it.
The idea was our students would go down as interns, but then we would provide housing and some support.
And we tried to come up with a name. We talked about calling it an institute or something like that. And the folks in Baltimore said, don't call it an institute or something like that. But it just sounds like something that nothing will ever get done. So it's got to be called an initiative that we're going to be forward-looking and forward-doing.
So Morgan made it a success. So next year we sent 3 or 4 interns. Recently we had like 15 or so interns down there.
The projects we initially engaged in were very simple, and I mean that in a wonderful way, and humble. They were projects using nature in its broadest sense, or using the environment as a way to revitalize, reclaim, reestablish, restore some aspects of the community. This meant a lot of community gardens, a lot of tree nurseries, a lot of tree planting.
Just walking into neighborhoods where we had no idea whether we would be accepted or completely rejected, but yet, this is our job, this is what we had to do. And walking into different community groups that had no idea what forestry was and what environmental activism was, in a place where there was just so much neglect and abandonment by any city service. So acceptance was amazing to me that I could actually walk into these community groups, walk into these neighborhoods, walk through these neighborhoods, and actually feel like we could make these contacts and connections and get something done.
On going down to Baltimore, he always said we were learning from people there. And that's a classic Burch concept, that we weren't going with the knowledge, and weren't these 25-year-olds going down to say Baltimore. We were going down to learn from people in Baltimore and contribute as we could. There was a sense early on that, wow, I could go, to Madagascar or do something really cool, or I could go to University of Baltimore and New Haven. And so that sometimes was a sell in the early years. Why would I stick around here when I could, see the world?
Because the idea was in TRI, they were going off to some exotic place. Well, that's a whole lot different than in a place where they're your fellow citizens. And they can say, get out of my neighborhood. I don't want you, or whatever.
The argument that we made, and I think compellingly, was that you could learn as much or more in this environment, in this intense environment. And also to say, go to work in the inner city to become a forester made very little sense to anyone but Bill. And of course, he was totally right.
People would look at ecology in the city, but the city as an ecosystem, nobody's been doing that.
We have created a new profession, or we have realized a profession that's known, I think, was dreamed of.
We were invited to come down to Baltimore by a group of people. I mean, as far as I can recall, nobody ever actually invited the Elk New Haven. So our relationship in New Haven has always been more complicated and more long-term because we are part of this community.
It's very important for me to feel connected to the broader New Haven community. And through an internship, I got to know people outside of school much more than other students. And I used to love to run into people on the green or at the library that I had worked with. I had been doing international biodiversity conservation work before I went to graduate school, and my intention was to get a master's degree and go back to that work. Working with URI made me really feel the importance of improving urban areas and basically building constituents for nature in cities so that there's less pressure on wildland. The internship most definitely opened up New Haven as a city instead of just being a Yale student and just being stuck on the campus. I felt more comfortable going around New Haven, and it wasn't a scary place. It was more like home.
What I did learn at urban resources was how to work with people, how to work with all kinds of community groups, all kinds of people, understanding the heartbeat of neighborhoods. You go into a situation and you gotta accept it and figure out, okay, what's the best way to work with folks, and then identify what tools they have, what are they bringing to the table in terms of community and social capacity. Besides the technical skills, like how to plant a tree, how to load a pickup truck, all the stuff I learned from Chris Dozick and the operation side of things, that definitely is expressed in how we run things here at KCG.
Definitely a lot of memories, and I think it's still continue right now. Every time we've been biking in heaven quite many times, and I always tend to go to the site where I work, and I try to contact those people who I work with.
I know vacant lot is not tabula rasa, but you were really able to transform this site into something absolutely amazing. And something that still surprises me now when I think about it, that you can find such a beautiful, natural seeming place in this overwhelming urban grid. I think it's really wonderful. And then whenever I think about this site, I think about Jeanette and Lee Thomas and their family and how they made me a part of their family. They didn't treat me like an intern or a student. They treated me as a neighbor, as a friend, and I carry that with me, and I think made me feel really confident in dealing with other community groups. That I was able to make that relationship and should be able to make that relationship in the future.
The different personalities that you maybe that's something that sometimes not but that sometimes it's just things like one person and often it's actually very forced to kind of make all of the personalities come together and rally around one goal of putting a tree with them. I remember what it was like to go through a learning process with that, to create something with people, to offer input, to create a method, to create a raised bed and so forth. And I remember coming to our interns and having just a wonderful time spending a summer with these people and being turned on to heavy metal music while wielding a pickaxe to break concrete was an illuminating experience. I remember riding the racks in this very hot summer delivering trees. That was one of my fondest memories. You said you were boasting earlier today about trees in particular and your record. Do you want to say anything about your record? Planted 35 trees. And as far as you know, that's the URI record for planting trees in the summer? Yes. Well, you're being modest about that now, but you're definitely going to
I felt during the internship that I just would love it if my job could do this forever. I mean, I knew that it was an internship and therefore set up for providing the optimal educational experience, but I do feel that the work I'm doing now is really builds upon that. A lot of people think it's very strange that I'm a forester in New York City, and all I can say is that to me, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to be concerned that things can grow in the city where people live. That experience got me my job as an urban forester in the city of Boston.
One of the things that struck me is as I continue to work in this field, and I go and I'm working in other areas, and just as an offhand comment, someone will say, oh, well, when I worked on URI, when they worked on URI, it was in New Haven or Baltimore, what have you, that those people are now out there. And these folks have become leaders, and they bring a whole different sensibility and culture to the way that we address natural resource management. We simply don't find from graduates from other schools.
I think it's certainly by courses, nobody learns anything until 10 years later, and they look back and say, oh, I'm using some of that stuff.
It's almost like a common understanding. Oh, you went to the URI program. Okay, then you know. I don't need to explain all this to you. Okay, you get it. Now, all the jobs that I've had, and why I feel that people value me in the workplace, is because of this framework or this set of ideas that I bring to the table.
The kind of journey in the process at Yale and with working with URI directly kind of leads me to be able to see things in Colombia in similar ways, with asking those questions.
Well, I work on primarily in wetlands tree restoration projects in the district, focused heavily on the impact collection. In order for any of these things to be successful, you have to get the buy-in people, real people in the neighborhood, and that's something that is not really self-evident how you do that. I think you have to actually work with people. You have to go through the experiences to find out what motivates people and how to relate to people. And URI presents a wonderful opportunity to do that, which you really can't get in school, just classrooms.
My job in the community world has a couple of different things that are outgrowths of my time at URI, and one of those is feeling that no matter what you do, you have the ability, every person has the ability to create those little teeny actions that inspire hope in other people and empower other people.
Later on, I got a job with UNCID developing a community forestry program in Alta-Valdivia, which strictly came about through my experience and skills I developed working for URI, which later translated into what I've been doing for the last 10 years, and on Rikers Island and in the neighborhoods of New York City. So that's a fun little stop.
the basic thing is that ultimately all environmentalism comes down to local community and local persons doing something. It's grand for people like us to go talk into the five-star hotels and pass resolutions and go to following and that. But ultimately, somebody has to go out and say, you're dumping that and that's bad, or you're doing that and that's, or we're going to change this, or we're going to dig this and make that work. So ultimately, you want a world that's natural source stewards, not just people from Yale flying around telling people to do.
The inspiration of Bill Burch is central to my experience with URI. He's somebody who not only taught me what it's like to leave a city and urban space in a way, but also how to connect with the people that are central to those spaces.
It's a really good time to be doing the type of work that comes out of URI programs, particularly because cities are being seen in a new light. I mean, let's face it, it's not because these ideas haven't been out there before. I mean, I think Bill Burch and the URI program in the early days, I mean, this is kind of the model that we were putting forth, and now it's seen as the solution to many things. So it's an exciting time.
Compliment stuff, but anyway, you get an idea of how these people from an elite institution can connect to the world and start another generation, another way of being stewards of the environmental world out there. And when I said that Taiwan has messages not only to send to the mainland, but to send around the world, because you are, as a nation, have a commitment that we simply had in individual cities. You have a whole country. The director listed that, I'm probably out of date, June 2004, and he lists 8 goals of the forestry department: to reinforce maintenance and management of forest recreational facilities, to enhance and raise national forests, to reinforce and manage forest land and forest resources protection, to enhance and manage and rehabilitation of national forests, to raise quality of landscape, to reinforce nature and habitat conservation and maintain the biodiversity, to promote community forestry and public participation, to establish a natural green road system, promote forest ecotourism, and expand forest volunteer system, to establish land classification system for sustainable forestry reference. But like all of us, there's much left to be done, even in Taiwan. If you look at the Taiwan Forest Research Institute about the same time, and you look at the research unit, now it's probably changed now, but if you look at it, it says there's a division of forest biology, division of silviculture, division of forestry economics, division of forest management, division of watershed management, division of forest protection, division of forest utilization, division of forest chemistry. There's no division of social community forestry. There's no division of recreation and tourism forestry. There's none of the things we say we're doing over here is in the research environment. So if we aren't doing research, and if we aren't educating new generations of new kinds of foresters, we're not going to get those 8 things done. So there we are. The question then is that I want to leave with you, and I could go on, but is that, in a sense, educational institutions of the 21st century are so classroom bound that we fail to recognize the greatest natural resource in all of our countries are the young people, high school students, university students, and those are persons that mostly are locked into Chaucer and mathematic tables. We need all that, yes indeed. But what we are not doing is getting them out and converting that theory and those methods to something real and see how it works in the real world with real people, real communities, real neighborhoods. And that's a transformation in the educational system most of us professors would prefer not to have happen. It's more better for us to stand up here and do PowerPoints and all that sort of business, but in a sense, it doesn't create the next generation that has much bigger problems. 7 billion people trying to live on this little globe. We have all kinds of things we need to consider. Now, one of the things I showed you, the Amsterdam thing, and said where the forest is. I do not have my people do horticulture. A tree, by tree, by tree, by tree. That's sort of the way we do a lot of things. There's an individual, there's an individual, there's an individual. But in point of fact, trees, people, plants, ecology, ecosystems don't live individual things. Yes, they're important. So we don't look at individual trees. I always call them street trees, the poor British soldiers walking down the street and the American revolutionaries picking them off one by one. Boom, boom, boom. They're lonely and lonesome things. What I try to do is say we use the working circle idea. We do forestry. Yeah, it's not the same kind of forest you do in the mountains, not the same kind of forest you do in a plantation. Those are important. But we're working in a different kind of habitat. If we don't think of it in a working circle means, then we're not solving the ecological problem. So we work in watersheds. Here's two different working circles. And you say, well, what's a working circle? Well, we've got grass verges. We've got things down the middle of the streets that have trees and plants on them. We've got vacant lots. We've got gardens. We've got various kinds of parks. And we've got home lots. Within the circle, all these greening places become a composite unit, a unit of management that makes sense to us as foresters. And it's a way of thinking that only we have. Architects don't look at that. Look at these guys in Amsterdam. Other disciplines don't look at the unit and say, how do I maximize the production of goods, benefits, and services from these greening elements of this community? And the second thing we try to stress, once you get into the urban habitat, the tree isn't the central interest. The tree is a means to improving the quality of life of the residents of that area. Big difference. If you run a commercial forest, by golly, yeah, you want to maximize biomass. But if you're working in a city habitat, you want to maximize benefits. You want to maximize those kinds of things that, in a sense, make it a better place to live. And you say, well, that's the United States. No, it's not the United States. I look out the window of this hotel and I see lots of places where I could do urban forestry, where I could begin to improve the quality of lives of people that are living there, or the people that are just commuting in and working there. That is, and the other thing is you work with people so you build community responsibility for one another as well as the plants and wildlife and so forth in their areas. So we could go on. That's probably enough. But I'll give you some ideas. You've got my email somewhere, I suppose. So write me on email. I'll try to answer. Be patient. I'm an elderly gentleman. I hate computers, so. You see my PowerPoint. My son said, boy, you're still back in the Pleistocene, huh? And I said, yeah, I'm happy to be there, too. So, but I'll get back to you and give you other kinds of things. If you're in the United States, stop by New Haven or Baltimore, and we can kind of give you a walk around, just like you would do if you're taking me up to Alishan. You give me a walk about there. So, but we're looking at forest and ecosystem, different. This is not a bog on the mountain. This is not an alpine forest. This is an urban forest. And we don't just study we study the whole system. Okay, well, that's
Thank you, Professor very much. He raised a very new concept idea about new profession, urban forest. Look at the working circle as a unit. The forester can work on that place. It's unique and integrate system, ecosystem. We can work in it. So, okay, we open to the audience to have the questions. Any questions?
Very thankful for your good talks. And I wanted to ask you some questions. Professor Burch, thank you. A good talk, yeah. And would you mind to talk more clear about that the working circles, which is used in urban areas? And this is one. And the other is how to communicate with other workers. If you have any good ideas and you wanted to others to do the same.
Some of the stuff that's in the volume there, particularly that's in Chinese, should give you ideas. But what happened in most urban places in the United States, I don't know about here, but cities that I worked in Thailand and Nepal, people are aware they live in a neighborhood. And they're aware of others, but they're often afraid to come out or often don't have any reason to work with or know their neighbors. And this idea, once you talk with ordinary people about, you live in this neighborhood. And it's not just Jim and Mary and Sam, it's also these plants because people love trees. Work in an urban area, they'll say, oh, I want this tree. Oh, don't cut that big tree, even though you and I know it's dead and it's going to fall in their car. But at that moment, they don't want anything to happen to that tree. When it falls in their car, then they come and say, why'd you let that tree fall? But that's part of the game. That's what we're paid to do, in a sense, is to communicate how they belong to this larger system. And then make organized groups, like I said, in Nepal, 13-some-hundred village forest groups. In Baltimore, we had 200 and some forest user groups. In other words, they work as a neighborhood. The student, the professional student, has technical experience. The thing we did in Baltimore is that because our students were Yale graduates, and at that time when we started, the mayor was a Yale graduate, helped. But when we went out into the neighborhood, there'd be neighborhoods where there'd be blocks filled with garbage. Garbage hadn't been picked up. We could call and get the garbage out. Then they said, wow, they got rid of the garbage. Then we could begin to say, what do we want to make out of this now open land we have? And they said, we want a park, we want this, we want that. And then we can help you get that. And so, in a sense, after a while, people start saying, oh yeah, we live in this neighborhood. We might be identified as by a tree even. We live here in Cypress neighborhood. This is what we do. So it requires a great deal of patience, but that's another thing, a trait of forests. I mean, you plant, 20, 30 years before you're going to see anything. And the same is patience to build these groups who will then begin to look after their resources and their own communities, and then start calling. You saw some of the garden pictures. Those were disgusting garbage-filled blocks. These neighborhood people converted them to works of art and beauty, and they're so proud. And they would call and say, "Can we get this? Or could you come and help us do that?" So you build this reciprocity between the professional and the people you're serving. It's just the same way out in rural Nepal or rural Thailand, and I imagine it would be the same in rural Taiwan, is that you build that sense of trust, that sense of reciprocity, helping one another. We want trees, we want this, they need this, and they need that. So we work together to create a mutual thing. So it's not a, it's bringing the message, but listening to what their message is and saying how this can work. Oh, you don't want that. Or if we have a problem often in the United States where people want blooming trees. They want, Japanese cherry. It's coming in February 1. Yale Press will have it. It has a little more guideline. But the first message in the book is, this is not the magic box that pulls out the super answer. This gives you a means, because you're the professional. You're the one that knows your habitat you're working with. Here's some things to think about. Go out and learn.
Okay, thank you.
So that you have to organize the professionals together.
Yeah.
And to be the advices for that they have any questions and they can communicate with you.
Yeah.
Give you your groups and
that's why the training is important. And I don't want anybody to miss a mistake. This is not an antagonism to traditional forestry. This is a complement. This is a different habitat than we're accustomed to working in. But we're taking ideas, concepts, skills from here and applying them here, adapting them to the new environment that we're now working in. So and many of the talks earlier today, people were sort of talking about it, because you saw the history of the Alishan, how we manage the trees and so forth over time, from exploitation to biodiversity. Those things, those require great adjustments too. It's easier to get a great big machine and plow up things and do that then and say, oh no, we got to do this, do that. That's a whole different orientation. And so it's up in northern Maine. They have a whole tree harvesters, and it's like a guy sits in this big machine and he's got stereo music. It used to be 6 people would do the logging. Now there's this one guy, he goes up and he goes back into the thing, he grinds it up, and then it's all ready to be hauled off to the pulp mill. That's not, we call that war on nature. That's not, you're not with nature in that sense. So there's different ways we approach it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think the time is up, and make a very simple conclusion for Professor Willian Burch speak. Because most of the audience Taiwanese, so some terms I can explain in Chinese. 他们刚才提到有所谓的 intern 出现在里面很多次，这是美国特别的一个学制。那其实有国内的一些大学在做，就是让大学生、研究生利用暑假3个月的这个时间，去找一个社区去做所谓的实习。那这个也会变成一个新的专业，就是今天Professor Willian Burch所讲的是 urban forest， 是都市林业工作者、都市林学家啊，他在美国是一个专业，所以我们看到影片里面有很多intern 结束的，他都有年代出来，比如2001年、2002年 intern 结束，他后来就在这个都市里面找到这样的一个工作， 去做都会生态系的一个营造跟管理。那这个是我做一个简单的一个说明。Okay, time's up. We next presenter, Dr. Song. Thank you for listening.